Morning, everyone. Yeah, we're going to discuss Rachel Reeves's statements yesterday, as well as a few other things that happened immediately after it. Um, Surprising. We knew the statement was going to be, oh, the Tories like hid all this stuff. Um, but she wasn't exaggerating. She actually has a smoking gun. For those who, I'm sure many of you have caught up with it anyway. So the way lots of people thought it was, because it's the normal political game. This is how lots of people thought it was going to pan out. People, Labour, Conservatives, everyone. There's things we knew needed fixing, and economists. This is before the election, so we'll come back. We'll go chronologically. So before the election, everyone was saying, look, why aren't Labour and all the Conservatives talking honestly about the fact that, whoever comes in, they're going to have to put up taxes because we know that there's all these things you have to deal with. Why aren't they talking about it? And the reason they didn't want to talk about it, the Tories don't want to talk about it because they just lowered taxes. So the last thing they wanted to say is, oh, yeah, we're just going to put them straight back up again. But also, Labour had presented spending plans along the lines of their manifesto. Beyond that, they didn't really want to talk too much about it. There were certain things they didn't want to get bogged down into because they didn't want the campaign to be about taxation. They wanted it to be about cost of living, NHS, housing, climate emergency, things like that. So that was the reason. And we all expected it to be a case of, they'd win the election, get into government. A few days later, they'd come out and go, oh, we've looked at the books. There's all this extra stuff they didn't say about the cheeky little rascals. And that's how it sort of panned out. We've had a few details, when last week, wasn't it? I think I did the stream on this, where Yvette Cooper said, oh, yeah, we already knew that the Tories had spent £400 million on the Rwanda plan when they've sent 4 volunteers there, but they weren't asylum seekers. They were failed asylum seekers. They could have been deported anyway. And then it transpired actually they'd spent £700 million and with much more committed to be spent, which has obviously now been stopped. We thought it'd be little details like that. So I thought yesterday's statement would be Rachel Reeves providing some more of those details. What she actually revealed was that there was, in the Tory budget, £35 billion worth of spending commitments that had zero money allocated to them. And if you're thinking, but they're talking about a £22 billion hole, it's because of that 35 billion, some of it you chip away with because some things will cost less than was first thought. It's blown a hole in the reserve's gone. So the reserve eats into some of that. And then there was an overspend that was already known about. And this is surprising because it shouldn't have been possible. And this is what the Tory argument was for the last few weeks. How can Rachel Reeves say that there were things being hidden from her when the Office for Budgetary Responsibility exists to stop that happening? Because when Jeremy Hunt announced his budget in March, this is the problem with Truss and Kwarteng. They did theirs without an OBR report. So it was complete, complete fabrication. But Jeremy Hunt did hand his budget over to the Office for Budgetary Responsibility, who, wrote a report on it. And you think to yourself, well, how is it possible for Rachel Reeves to claim that there were things being hidden? I don't just mean minor things, but major things being hidden, because the OBR make that impossible. And what it transpires is, it turns out that it doesn't, that things can be hidden if Jeremy Hunt deliberately told Treasury officials to withhold certain information from the OBR. Now, what the OBR have now done is, so Rachel Reeves got the Treasury to invite them in last week to go over this. The OBR have now published a letter where they say, we already had concerns, documented concerns about transparency from the Treasury under Jeremy Hunt. So they were basically saying, we thought he wasn't being completely straight with us. And now they're going to launch their own review because the Treasury is now, or Rachel Reeves is promising that the Treasury are now going to be much more transparent with them. So it should now in future be impossible. But that is the thing. So Jeremy Hunt has basically, he concealed things from Parliament, from the Office of Budgetary Responsibility, which explains, because, you know, I don't know whether people remember, I'm sure you do, ahead of the budget, you know, where he was cutting taxes, and economists were saying he's got no room to cut taxes. How's he going to cut taxes? There's no room to cut taxes. And then, you know, they cut national insurance in like January, then they did it again in the March, in the main budget. And you think, and yet the Office of Budgetary Responsibility report, it sort of said, "Ooh, this is a bit tight, this, but you know, all right, whatever." It sort of adds up. There's like £3 billion looking a bit iffy, but you know, it's all right. And you think, how? Because we went from economists saying there's no room for tax cuts to all of a sudden tax cuts, and there was no like crash in the pound because the OBR said, well, it sort of adds up. How? Because he was lying to the OBR. He's concealing things from the OBR. That's how. So it's almost like, you know, Kwasi Kwarteng presented a budget statement without an OBR report. He didn't allow the OBR to check it out first. Jeremy Hunt did allow the OBR to check it out, but he lied to them. And Rachel Reeves has said this morning, yeah, he's absolutely lied. And I'll tell you something else this morning. I don't know if people have seen this. So he was on like, what's the show with Ed Balls on it? One of the ITV thing. I can't remember. I don't watch telly. But I watched the clip of him trying to explain to Ed Balls. So one of the big figures that was totally unfunded was a £6.4 billion overspend on Asylum. Now, I will point out, Jeremy Hunt is not denying these figures, by the way. He's not denying these figures. He's only denying whether or not the money needed to be spent. So he claims this £6.4 billion overspend for Asylum is money that wouldn't need to be spent. Why? Because he says the bulk of it is for accommodation for asylum seekers on the backlog. And he says this morning, he said this, they were all going to go to Rwanda, but it's Labour who stopped the plan so they can take ownership of it. Now, here's the thing. Even for people who believe in the Rwanda plan, right, which is absolute rubbish, even for people who believe in the Rwanda plan, how many people were going to Rwanda? Like, in reality, I don't think any were going to Rwanda, let's be honest. But we've only got housing over there for a few hundred. Remember, we funded a load of new houses in Rwanda. Most of them, we know that 70% of them have been sold to local Rwandans. And then the Rwanda government said, oh, yeah, but that was all part of the deal because the idea is we integrate them. So we sell most of the houses to Rwandans, and then the asylum seekers come, they integrate in those communities. So we've actually got housing. We've paid for housing for a few hundred asylum seekers at most, right? There's it's just under 120,000 people in the backlog because they've just allowed this backlog to grow, right? So even if you could legally send them to Rwanda, which we can't, even Rwanda plan believers, do they really think we were going to send 120,000 to Rwanda? And we'd have to send them right now because that's £6.4 billion. That's an overspend. That's not how much it's costing us to accommodate asylum seekers. That's the overspend. That's the money that hasn't been allocated at all. There has been funding allocated to asylum. This is the stuff that hasn't been. Come to those super chats in one moment. Just finish this last thought. Who believes? So, in order to avoid this £6.4 billion, because we're already several months into this tax year, you'd have to be suggesting that Jeremy Hunt is saying we'd have sent those people to, and Ed Balls really should have pinned him on this. You're suggesting we would have sent 120,000 people to Rwanda this month if you'd won the election. Because if you weren't going to send them immediately, you're still going to have to pay out that money that was totally unallocated. Anyway, a couple of super chats. George Yours, £2. Thank you. This is not being reported in the right-wing press. No, it is not. The right-wing press are very much covering it up. Alec Barrett, £5. Could Hunt be referred to the Privileges or Standards Committee? I don't know. I don't even know that it's worth it, in all honesty. Putting both of these comments here. First of all, I don't think so, because he won't have told a specific lie about it. He's withheld information. So unless someone digs up a statement from Jeremy Hunt where he's specifically asked about something and he lies about it, I don't think there's anything for the parliamentary authorities to do about it. It's not against I mean, he's withheld information from Parliament. He's withheld information. Unless someone specifically asked him about some of these things and he lied, then I don't think there's anything to really go at him with. But in terms of the press, I mean, this is the problem. If we had a media that actually reported things properly, the Tories' reputation should be absolutely shot. It should be destroyed. But it's not going to be. But Labour do need to make sure that this gets out to the public, because this is deliberate. This is fraud, basically. What has happened is the Tories, knowing they're going to lose the election, have basically I described it as a thief who've nicked a credit card and they've run up as much debt as they can before the card's cancelled. That's what they've done. They've literally take the and this is how inconsistent they are. And this is what they need tackling over. So the Tories, right? Alicia Kearns, who's now, is she in the shadow cabinet now? Yeah, she is. She's in the shadow cabinet. I can't remember what as. So she said that the Conservatives always accept the recommendations of the pay review bodies, which is not true because they rejected it a few years ago. But anyway, so she's claiming they would have accepted the pay review body this year is recommending pay rises for public sector workers, which would total £9.4 billion. No funding was allocated for that. So which is it? Would you have accepted the pay review recommendations? In which case, why? Because they've already had them. Why wouldn't you have allocated funding for it? Because they've allocated zero funding. It's not just that they haven't allocated enough, they haven't allocated any. And also, there's 2 point something, I can't remember, was it 2.2 or something? There's 2 point something billion pounds that hasn't been allocated for the pay awards they already agreed from last year. So they haven't even funded the pay awards that are already in place to the tune of £2 and a bit billion. It's absolutely insane. Chris was saying Ed Ball should do a lot of things. Quit GMB, with most appropriate being the husband of a minister. Holding the government to account is not a good look. You can say that, yeah. I mean, that is a weakness, I'll grant you. But at the same time, there is someone else there, and that's essentially up to the production team, isn't it? You can't say that you can't have a particular job because your spouse has a different job. I do take the point, though, that it is always going to look a bit weird having a former Labour shadow chancellor, but certainly the spouse of an actual Labour cabinet minister, trying to hold a former Tory cabinet minister to account. Does look odd. Perhaps his I don't know who the other person with him is. Is that Susanna person? I don't watch it, so I'm afraid I don't know them. Maybe she should have taken the lead on it. Who knows? Maggie Pie, 20 Swedish krona, thank you. Are there consequences for people like Jeremy Hunt? Very rarely. The thing is, consequences are designed by politicians. As much as I say how ridiculous it is that the British press regulates itself, politicians regulate themselves as well, right? We should definitely have higher standards. And as I say, in a particular case like this, Jeremy Hunt, the way the system works, it works on the basis that if they fail to meet certain standards, the public can vote them out. But that only works if the public really find out about it, and that's where our media falls down. Which is why I always say, in politics, I always come back to the media. I don't even blame politicians half the time. I can't even, ultimately, if I'm going to say who's ultimately responsible for Jeremy Hunt's malfeasance, the press. Because if our media held politicians to account without fear or favour, Jeremy Hunt wouldn't have even attempted to do this, because he would know he would never get away with it. It's because no Labour chancellor would ever do this. And that's not me saying because I'm a Labour supporter. Oh, that's because Labour chancellors are all decent chaps and Tories are all scoundrels, It is because Labour would never get away with it. No Labour chancellor would ever feel they could get away with it. That's the difference. So ultimately, the behaviour of politicians is largely a result of the behaviour of the media. Alan, could you £5 super chat? Thank you. Could you debunk the austerity in punishing poor pensioner claims? Phil, help those gobbling the media spin. Okay, so what's happened with the pension thing? So There are winter payments, winter energy payments for pensioners of £200 each winter. And what Rachel Reeves has said is she's going to, it's universal at the moment, she's going to means test them. So and specifically, she's going to means test them, but also for pensioners who meet that requirement, who are 80 years or older, they're actually going to get £300. So she's actually boosting it. So when Tories are saying, oh, she's going to hurt the most vulnerable, she's actually boosting it by 50% for the most vulnerable. Now, there is still a criticism in that the means testing is any pensioner who is in receipt of any means tested benefit will get the payment, which means anyone who's not won't. Now, there's two problems with that. First of all, there are people who qualify for means tested benefits as pensioners, but don't have it because they either don't know or whatever. So, and Martin Lewis has been straight on the case this morning. So the government should make sure that everyone who's eligible gets it, because if you haven't applied, you will be deemed not eligible. So that puts you in trouble. The second issue is, so there will be people who are not eligible for any means tested benefit, but if you're only just above the threshold, this loss of £200 could still hurt you. We're still in a cost of living crisis. Energy bills are still going to go up this winter. Martin Lewis's suggestion is something that's been used before. Maybe you add an extra thing in so that anyone on the first 4 bands of council tax also get it. Because from Rachel Reeves' point of view, she's thinking, we've got to cut costs here. There's plenty of pensioners out there who do not need the £200, right? They don't need it. Most pensioners don't need it. They've got enough. And that's fine. The issue is, where do you set the bar? And it may well be that, you know, because remember, what she's announced yesterday is a budget statement. She's nothing set in stone. The actual budget's October the 30th. So there are some things around where it's set. For my money, simply means testing it is not I have no problems with means tested things. I'm, you know, some things do not, because it's a benefit. Benefits, you know, I mean, I'm all in favor of universal income if we can come up with a system for doing it. But without that, yeah, if you've got a budget crisis, and we've got a budget crisis, then turning something from universal to means tested is fine. The argument should be about where is the bar. Then Ivan Ambrose, £20, thank you very much, says, Jeremy Hunt was like a petulant child yesterday. I watched it live. The Tories are throwing tantrums again because they're telling lie after lie again. No humility as to why they lost so badly at the election. Well, I mean, I'll tell you what's incredible as well. All the Tories were like that. You can understand Jeremy Hunt being like that, but they were all like that. Now, if you're going to take the view that the Conservative Party are fundamentally a sound party, but they had a few rogues put in charge of them over the last few years, shouldn't other Tory MPs have been appalled? Shouldn't some Tory MPs have stood up and said, this is absolutely shocking, absolutely shocking, I can't believe it? No, they all came up with excuses. They all attacked officials as well, which was disgusting, because officials do not, it's all part of this woke blob thing. Officials don't make decisions. You know, the policies are set by politicians. Officials can advise them, but ultimately it's politicians who make those decisions, which is why you have such a difference when we change government. It's the same civil service. This isn't like in some countries where your senior civil servants change as well. I mean, we're getting rid of the cabinet secretary. He's an idiot. The last lot should have got rid of him. You know, we've got an apolitical civil servant. So it's the same civil servants who are going to be implementing Labour policies as implemented Tory policies. The difference is the politicians, not the civil servants. How much cash did the Tories grab on their way out? They certainly fill their pockets with PP. Well, that is a question in itself, isn't it? There should absolutely be. Like some of these projects that, because like people are saying, oh, Rachel Reeves has cut these infrastructure projects. It's like, well, she hasn't. There was no money given to them. The money wasn't there. Like the 40 new hospitals, the money wasn't there. I remember before a few months ago, there was an official who was asked, because these 40 new hospitals were supposed to be here this Parliament, remember? Boris Johnson promised in this Parliament, didn't get them. Now, I am going to accept COVID. Okay, COVID was always going to disrupt some investment. Fine, fair enough. But this official was asked, But first of all, none of them have been built. It's not just that 40 haven't been built, none of them. And then this official was asked, will any of them have been built by 2030? And he said, probably not. So even by 2030, there was a lower than 50% chance that any of them would have been built. And the reason for that is the money was not there. The Conservatives did not allocate enough funding. And then when inflation took off, and obviously all the costs spiraled out of control, they didn't give any extra money to it. So she's not cut things. What she's done is said, there's no money for this. The Tories effectively cut these things themselves because no money. What she said is, I'm not going to look for the money for these things because there's more important things. Even when it comes to hospitals, and they've got to play this carefully because obviously we need hospitals. But what's more important, a new hospital in a Tory MP's area where they've already got a functioning hospital building, or replacing a hospital that's literally fallen down because of the Rocks situation. That's where the money needs to go. Anyway. But it's absolutely incredible to think, because honestly, I was blown away yesterday. I did not expect it. I thought it was just going to be, they'd already, like I said, leaked a few details out, like, the true cost of the Rwanda scheme, stuff like that. I thought it'd be things like that. Did not imagine she was going to come to Parliament and say Jeremy Hunt deliberately withheld 35, never mind the £22 billion hole. That's net. £35 billion worth of spending commitments that were completely unfunded. And he'd withheld them from Parliament, and he'd withheld them from the Office of Budgetary Responsibility, and of course, by extension, the public. Absolutely incredible. And the way that Jeremy Hunt is trying to defend himself against this now is ludicrous. The best thing for Jeremy Hunt, someone's referring to Hunt's letter. Yeah, he's written a letter to the civil service going, you seem to be, you rascals, you ratted me out, you little so-and-sos. Unbelievable. Absolutely unbelievable. But there's a downside to it as well, in that, because I thought it was just political shenanigans, because the financial situation genuinely is worse than expected, that means that, Rachel Reeves' intended budget is going to have to be a bit different, because we were already getting ready for some extra tax rises like capital gains, maybe inheritance tax, jiggery-pokery. Maybe there's going to have to be a lot more reform of the tax system. Maybe it'll be interesting. The budget in October will now be very, very interesting. I think it was probably going to be anyway. Josh, £2 super chat. Thank you. I thought, sorry, there's no money left was a joke. Yeah, well, that's the irony. So that letter left in 2010 was a joke that was started by the Tories. It's tradition. So that was a joke that the Tories then turned into, they convinced a load of people it was serious. And they still do. You still get some people who are taken in by it thinking it was serious now. And yet this really is the situation. This is like, not only is there no money left, there's minus £22.3 billion left. It's like there's no money, and you've got an extra £22 billion to find just to keep things level, just to maintain Tory spending limits. And given that Labour want to spend on things, extra things, like, for example, the £9.4 billion public sector pay awards, that was included in the £35 billion. But what wasn't was the extra amount of money that Labour are giving to junior doctors, so 22.3% pay increase over 2 years. So that's extra. That's absolutely extra. If the sound's crackling, sorry, there's nothing I can do about that. I don't know what that's about. But so Labour do want to spend on things the Tories didn't. And it's really this simple. If the Tories haven't left them the money to do that, then it's quite simple. You've got to raise more money and reduce your costs. So Labour will be raising more money. The Tories don't get to complain about that because they've left them with this hole. And they're going to have to cut some things that Labour weren't all that asked about, like hospital buildings where the current building isn't falling down, to prioritise the ones that are falling down. And there's been a couple of other projects, like road projects, like a bypass somewhere, where other people have been suggesting. Sorry, if there's something wrong with the microphone, I don't know. I do have my fan on, but it's always pointed away, and it's never been a problem before. So I don't know. Sorry. Skylar saying, Phil, you pointed out for a long time the Tories were salt in the earth for Labour government. If you could see that, Labour must surely have seen it. We knew that they were wrecking things, but we thought it was by doing things like. So I'll give you the examples of salt in the earth that we did see. Not dealing with asylum, therefore you allow the asylum backlog to build to the point where you then have to use expensive accommodation, which costs money. But we didn't know that the funding wasn't there for it. We knew it was costing more than it should. We didn't know by how much. So they hid the scale of the cost by £6.4 billion. Other things we knew they were doing was, for example, by not dealing with public sector pay properly. They were damaging public services, causing staff to leave, meaning that Labour would have to find more money to get their pay back on track. So that was a known thing, but we didn't know by how much. It's things like that. So there was things like that we could see. The tax cuts, the national insurance cuts was an example of salt in the earth, denying Labour tax revenues, which ironically it'll just force them, because they're not going to put national insurance back up, and they've said they're not going to. But there was no way they were going to go into that election saying, "Oh yeah, we're just going to reverse the national insurance cut." So inevitably, that means you have to put it from somewhere else. But we did not know that Jeremy Hunt had deliberately hidden £35 billion from the OBR, which is effectively what he's done. Because what Rachel, in terms of what the information that Jeremy Hunt gave to Parliament, and therefore Rachel Reeves, who was planning, right? She's been planning this budget before she came to power. As far as she was concerned, that 35 billion, there was no 35 billion pound overspend, because he said there wasn't. There was a £3 billion overspend. That's what the OBR said, £3 billion. Turns out it's £35 billion, which includes reserves. So she thought she had about £9 billion worth of reserves. No reserves, gone, finished, eaten up. So that's the situation. She thought she was inheriting, yes, a terrible economic situation. Don't get me wrong. The economy is 18% smaller than it was when Labour were last in power. In real terms, our economy, our GDP, is 18% smaller. GDP per capita is even worse. Stephen Fry was pointing out at the weekend on Sunday, he said our economy was, he said it slightly wrong, I'll correct it. He said our economy was the same size as America's at the banking crisis in 2008, and now it's half the size. Now, the reality is what he means is GDP per capita. It is true. In 2008, our GDP per capita was the same as America's. Same. Now, the American economy weathered the storm of the banking crisis way easier. Now it's a massive economy, right? So ours did go down, but it is now at 60% of America's. And we should have recovered by now, and we didn't. How do you prevent a Jeremy Hunt from happening again? That's the thing, you really can't. So what Labour are doing is they are putting in things in place to hold themselves to account. So there is going to be more transparency with the OBR. They're going to appoint a value for public money commission. So they're going to basically create straitjackets for themselves to make sure that there's independent bodies holding them to account, but there is nothing to stop a future government just dismantling it again. So if the Conservatives come back to power, to begin with, okay, those things will still be in place, but there is nothing to stop them just dismantling it. So there's nothing you can do to really prevent it happening again. This is why I say ultimately it comes down to the media, because anything that this government puts in place, as long as it's entirely domestic, another government can change. There are some things the government can do to permanently tie you, like Brexit, for example, because this government, our government now, cannot just reverse Brexit, even if it wanted to, because it's up to other people outside the country. But in terms of domestic laws or rules or anything like that, there's nothing you can do to tie the hands of a future government. Future government can just change all the rules again. And that's the reality of it. Captain Bart Roberts, £5 super chat, thank you. It says, you find out your spouse has spent all the money in the joint account. Oh, you're going to dodgy here. Run it above the overdraft, then hide in the demands with menaces from the bank. It's an odd way to describe it. But at the same time, I mean, you know, I don't know that I would describe Labour and the Conservatives as spouses. But yeah, but the big job they've got, I'll just leave you as the last thought. Will Jeremy Hunt be prosecuted? No, he ain't. Politicians don't make criminal offences of their normal behaviour. He hasn't committed a criminal offence. You know, I describe it as being basically like fraud, but you know, when it's a politician that does it, it's not fraud. You know what I mean? It's yeah. The issue here is Labour need to get this message out to the public. They're not going to have the media help them. So this is going to be a test of their communication skills. Unfortunately, I don't think much of their communication skills, but there it is. Final one here. We are going to close it here. Tim Ballum, £10 super chat. Thank you very much. Rail infrastructure over and over again shows it pays for itself. Look at Crossrail. HS2 would do the same. So the money borrowed to pay for it would be repaid by ticket sales. The problem with the borrowing, so I am hoping there are some ideas for reforms that Rachel Reeves may put in place this October, which could unlock more borrowing. However, you do have to be aware when you borrow for investment, economically, it makes sense, right? You borrow for investment. At the end of the day, if a private company will invest in something, it means it thinks it can get a return. So if a private company will invest in something, obviously the government could invest in it as well, right? And get the same return, which means either more money coming back to the Treasury, which is to our benefit, or you could charge less to the customers. That's still a benefit, right? However, you do not see the benefit within a parliament. So it's like, if you borrow, then you pay the political price at the next election, but you don't have the benefit to sell. That is the problem. Because what the Tory media will do is they will point to the extra amount of national debt, which is already high now. It's the highest it's been since the 60s. So they'll point to the national, as in terms of GDP, as a proportion of GDP, they'll point to the size of the debt and say, that's the cost of it. Then they'll calculate how much those debt repayments will be. And they won't mention how much revenue will come in eventually. So that's the difficulty with the borrowing thing. That's why Labour, you think that Labour have made this choice on the borrowing thing. They have not made a choice. It's what the electorate expect of them. And that is unfortunately, it's a constraint you have to accept if you want to win power. But anyway, there it is. We'll leave it there. Thank you very much for coming on, everyone. Have a very good day. It looks like it's going to be hot again. Already too hot. But have a great day. Don't forget to click the like button and subscribe for further content. And until next time, I will see you later.